Why does comfrey, a plant that produces 20 to 25% crude protein and feeds a chicken flock for 20 years from a single $12 planting, appear nowhere in any commercial poultry feed sold in the United States? My neighbor Tom Cahill, 63 years old, has kept chickens on about a third of an acre in central Tennessee since 2006. He has a row of comfrey plants along his back fence line, about 14 plants total, in a strip 2 feet wide and 28 feet long, roughly the length of a standard shipping container cut in half. He cuts it, throws it into the run, and watches 12 hens strip it to stems in under an hour. His Purina flock raiser bill runs about $11 a month. His neighbors with the same flock size and similar production numbers are paying $28. He has been doing this since 2012. That strip of plants has never cost him $1 since the day he planted it, and it's showing no signs of slowing down in year 13. Comfrey root crowns, once established, don't degrade in productivity the way a laying hen does. They get more productive in years 3 and 4 as the root system deepens. Comfrey has been a feed and medicine plant on working farms since at least the 1600s and was documented specifically for poultry supplementation in European agricultural literature through the mid-20th century. It disappeared from American backyard chicken keeping. Around the same time, commercial layer pellets became the default, which was not a coincidence. What I want to cover in this video is not that comfrey exists, because you already knew that, but exactly why it works at the cellular level, the specific variety that matters, and the precise setup that makes it a 20-year zero-cost protein investment rather than an aggressive weed problem. Near the end, I'm covering the one management mistake that turns a productive comfrey planting into an invasive nightmare, and it's a variety selection decision that almost every video on this topic gets wrong. The number that changes how you think about comfrey is not the protein percentage, it's the comparison. A 50-pound bag of Purina flock raiser runs about $22 at Tractor Supply Company and contains 20% crude protein. Dried comfrey leaf runs 20 to 25% crude protein, according to the USDA Nutrient Composition Database and multiple European agricultural research publications going back to the 1950s. Those are the same protein percentages from the same protein source type, leafy plant material, at a cost that starts at $12 for root crowns and then drops to $0 for the remaining 19 years of the plant's life. A bag of flock raiser at $22 every 3 weeks for a 12-bird flock adds up to about $381 per year. The comfrey strip Tom is running, 14 plants in a 2 by 28-foot strip, roughly the footprint of a standard double bed on its side, produces cuttings from April through October in his Tennessee climate. Over a 20-year planting lifespan, that initial $12 investment in root crowns has offset somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 in supplemental protein costs from purchase feed. Nobody selling a $22 bag of flock raiser is going to make a video about that math. The mechanism behind why comfrey works is worth understanding at more than a surface level, because it explains why the plant can't be fully replicated by commercial supplements. Comfrey is exceptionally deep-rooted, with a taproot reaching 6 feet or more, roughly the height of a doorway, into subsoil layers that most garden plants never access. That depth allows comfrey to draw up minerals, including calcium, potassium, iron, and boron from subsoil mineral deposits that surface-level soil amendments don't contain. The leaves also contain allantoin, a nitrogen compound that supports cell division and tissue regeneration, which is documented in livestock and poultry nutrition literature as contributing to gut lining integrity and accelerated growth in young birds. You won't find allantoin on the Purina ingredient list. It's not there because it can't be economically synthesized at the scale commercial feed requires. It's free in every comfrey leaf. And the protein profile in comfrey contains all the essential amino acids required by laying hens, including methionine, which plant-based grain rations are consistently short on, and which commercial pellet manufacturers add synthetically. The methionine in comfrey is naturally occurring and bound in protein complexes that the bird's digestive system processes differently than synthetic methionine powder. Whether that difference in bioavailability is meaningful at practical feeding rates is a question the poultry science literature hasn't answered definitively. What I can say from watching Tom's flock and my own for years is that the birds eat comfrey voluntarily and with genuine enthusiasm, which is not how they react to a handful of synthetic supplements sprinkled on grain. Variety selection is where most backyard chicken keepers make the mistake that turns a productive plant into a property management problem, and I want to be direct about it before going any further. There are two main comfrey types you'll encounter: common comfrey, Symphytum officinale, which produces fertile seed, spreads aggressively from root fragments, and once established in an area you don't want. It is very difficult to remove, and Bocking 14, a Russian comfrey hybrid developed at the Bocking Research Station in England in the mid-20th century by Lawrence Hills of the Henry Doubleday Research Association. Bocking 14 is sterile. It produces no viable seed. It propagates only from root cuttings, which means it stays exactly where you put it and spreads only when you deliberately divide the roots. This is the only variety worth planting if you're on a residential lot, near a neighbor's property, or anywhere you'd regret an aggressive perennial taking over. Every online seller of comfrey root cuttings is not selling Bocking 14 by default. Ask specifically. Bocking 14 root cuttings are available from strictly medicinal seeds and several small herb farms that specialize in it. The price difference between Bocking 14 and common comfrey cuttings is usually minimal, about $1 or $2 per cutting. The difference in what you're committing your property to is not minimal. Plant Bocking 14, and you have a 20-year protein crop on your terms. Plant common comfrey without understanding its spread behavior, and you have a different kind of long-term project, one that your neighbors may eventually have opinions about. Setup is where the difference between a productive strip and a struggling one gets made, and the requirements are more forgiving than most plants of this protein density have any right to be. Comfrey tolerates clay soil, partial shade up to about 50% canopy cover, and soil pH between 5.5 and 7.0, which describes most residential backyards in the eastern half of the United States without amendment. It does not tolerate standing water. The roots will rot in a consistently wet planting site. On a well-drained residential lot, it will grow anywhere you put it. Plant root cuttings 3 to 4 inches deep, roughly knuckle to second knuckle depth, oriented with the flat cut end up and the tapered cut end down. Spacing it 2 to 3 feet apart in a row, which is roughly the distance from your elbow to your fingertips, plus a handspan, gives each plant enough crown room to reach full production, which happens in year 2 when the root system has had a full season to establish depth. Year 1, plants produce usable cuttings, but at lower yield. Expect about 40 to 60% of mature plant output in year 1. Don't be disappointed by the first year. The root system is building down into subsoil, and that's where the mineral-rich leaves come from in subsequent years. First cutting in spring should wait until plants reach 18 to 24 inches tall, roughly waist-high on a short person, or knee-high on a tall one, which happens in April or May, depending on your latitude. Cut the whole plant to about 2 inches above ground level. It regrows fully in 4 to 6 weeks, and you cut again. In Tennessee and the Upper South, you'll get 5 to 6 cuttings per season. In Ohio and the Upper Midwest, 4 to 5. In the Northeast and New England, 3 to 4, with the growing season starting later and ending earlier. In the Deep South and Gulf Coast, heat causes a summer dormancy period in July and August, where productivity drops, but the plant resumes in September and often produces into November. Year-round production is possible in parts of the Pacific Northwest, where winters stay mild. One thing I got wrong on my first planting: I put the row too close to the garden bed edge, about 18 inches away, thinking comfrey wouldn't be a problem since I was using Bocking 14. The issue wasn't lateral spread from the comfrey itself. It was that, when I divided the roots in year 3 to expand the planting, I dropped a fragment I didn't notice, and that fragment established itself in the garden bed. Bocking 14 is sterile, but it's not immune to accidental propagation from root fragments. Keep your planting strip at least 3 feet from any bed you don't want comfrey in, and when you divide and transplant, work carefully. Every small piece of root that stays in the soil can produce a new plant. Feeding protocol matters more than most people expect, because comfrey is not a complete feed, and overconfidence in it causes the same production drop as any other nutritional imbalance. The right framing is this: Comfrey is a high-protein, high-mineral supplement that covers what grain-based feed is short on. And grain-based feed covers the energy density and carbohydrate content that comfrey doesn't provide well. You need both sides of that equation. A laying hen needs roughly 15 to 18 grams of protein per day depending on breed and production rate. On a standard 16% layer ration, she's getting that from about 100 grams of dry feed. Comfrey at 20 to 25% crude protein can contribute meaningfully to that daily requirement, but fresh comfrey is mostly water. The dry matter content of fresh comfrey leaf is about 12 to 15%, which means a handful of fresh cutting, weighing about 100 grams, roughly the weight of a standard large egg, delivers about 3 to 4 grams of actual protein. That's not nothing. In a flock context across a full summer season, it's a measurable feed cost reduction. Feeding rate: one large double handful of fresh cuttings per bird per day during the growing season is where most experienced keepers land. Tom uses an armload for 12 birds, dumped into the run twice a day, morning and midday, so the birds have time to work through it before heat wilts it in summer. Wilted comfrey ferments quickly, and birds lose interest in it within a few hours. In summer heat above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly the temperature of a warm bath, wilting begins within 90 minutes of cutting. Feed morning and midday. Never leave a pile sitting past midday in July. Cut and feed fresh. One limitation that matters regionally: comfrey is fully dormant from first hard freeze through early spring in cold climates. In central Ohio, that means from about mid-November through late March, comfrey contributes nothing to the feed equation. You're back on full commercial ration for those months, unless you've built the other zero-cost winter protein systems I covered in earlier videos. Comfrey alone doesn't solve winter. It solves summer, and that's real value because summer is when your cost per dozen eggs should be lowest, and often isn't because most keepers haven't built any free protein into their warm weather operation. You're running the full commercial ration in July when 6 different free protein sources are available within 50 feet of your coop. That's the gap comfrey fills first. I put together a complete guide called the Homestead Flock Bible that has the full comfrey planting calendar by region, the feeding rate chart by flock size, and the cost worksheet showing the feed bill reduction across the first 5 years of a productive planting. It also covers how to stack comfrey with the other zero-cost protein methods to build year-round coverage. The link is in the description below. Scan the QR code on screen if you're watching on a phone. The $500 billion framing in the title deserves a direct explanation, because I don't put numbers in titles unless they're defensible. Global commercial animal feed market revenue is estimated at roughly $500 billion annually by multiple agricultural market research firms, with the North American poultry feed segment representing a significant portion of that. That number is relevant not because some conspiracy decided to bury comfrey, which is not what I'm claiming, but because no $500 billion industry has any financial incentive to research, promote, or publish practical guides to a plant that backyard keepers can grow once and never buy a pellet from again. The research on comfrey as a poultry supplement that does exist is mostly 1940s through 1970s European agricultural literature. British smallholder publications from that period are full of specific yield data and feeding protocols. American Agricultural Extension Services published almost nothing on it after the early commercial feed period, because there was no commercial application to justify the research budget. Lawrence Hills, the British horticulturist who developed Bocking 14, spent decades documenting comfrey's applications in livestock feeding, and published extensively on it through the Henry Doubleday Research Association. His 1953 book, Comfrey Past, Present, and Future, is the primary English-language technical reference on the plant as a livestock supplement, and the core findings remain consistent with more recent nutritional analysis. If you want to go deeper into the historical documentation, that's where to start. Used copies are available through agricultural library networks and online book dealers for under $20. The research didn't stop because the plant stopped working. It stopped because the research funding went where the commercial product development was. That's not buried. It's just not widely discussed in channels that run ads for feed companies. Think about that for a moment. A bag of Kalmbach layer pellets at $26 for 50 pounds. 12 hens burning through a bag every 3 weeks. Over 5 years, that's $2,252 in feed. The comfrey row that provides meaningful supplemental protein for 8 of those months per year started at $12. Over 5 years, it has contributed somewhere between $700 and $900 in feed offset, depending on your climate and how aggressively you feed it. The bag keeps getting more expensive. The root crowns don't. They're in the ground producing for free. And every spring when the first cutting comes up, you've already paid for the full season in advance, years ago. A commercial farmer managing thousands of birds can't use comfrey at scale because you can't automate a hand-cut, fresh leaf feeding operation. On a backyard flock of 8 to 24 birds, it takes about 4 minutes per feeding event. That's the operational window where this math works well. Below 8 birds, the impact per dollar of feed replaced is lower, but still positive. Above about 30 birds, the labor time per feeding event starts competing with other management tasks, and you'd need a larger planting than most residential lots can support. Tom's 14-plant strip handles 12 birds comfortably through the full growing season. He'd want about 20 plants for 18 birds, still well within a standard residential backyard footprint. 2 methods for extending comfrey's usefulness past the growing season, and the results are mixed enough that I want to give you both with honest numbers. Drying comfrey for winter use is possible and produces a product with preserved protein content, but the palatability drops significantly compared to fresh material. Dried comfrey crumbled into mash or offered as a loose supplement in a dry container gets eaten, but not with the enthusiasm that fresh cutting gets. The birds will pick at it. They won't mob the feeder for it the way they do when you throw fresh green cuttings into the run in July. If you want to try drying, cut in late summer, spread on wire racks in full sun or in a shed with good airflow, and allow 5 to 7 days until the leaves crumble dry. Store in paper bags or burlap, not sealed plastic, because residual moisture in sealed containers produces mold. A season's dried cutting from 14 plants won't carry you through 5 months of Ohio winter, but it can bridge the gap in November and March when the plant isn't producing yet, but winter hasn't fully set in. Fermenting fresh comfrey into a liquid feed, which some keepers do by soaking cuttings in water for 2 to 3 weeks to produce a high nitrogen liquid that's actually more commonly used as a garden fertilizer than a feed, is not something I'd recommend for a primary protein source. The fermentation process changes the protein structure in ways that reduce digestibility compared to fresh material. Tom tried it one winter, reported that the birds drank it without obvious enthusiasm, and went back to dried crumbled leaf by February. I have no explanation for why the liquid ferment is less effective than dried leaf at a structural level, and I haven't found poultry nutrition literature that addresses it specifically. A poultry nutritionist would have a better answer. I don't fully understand why the liquid ferment performs worse than dried leaf as a protein source, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. My honest recommendation is to treat comfrey as a warm weather supplement. Build your winter protein coverage from the other zero-cost protein methods I've covered on this channel, and let the comfrey rest in winter the way it naturally wants to. In cold climate setups in Ohio, Indiana, and New England, the productive comfrey window runs roughly late April through late October, about 6 months of the year. That leaves 6 months of full dependence on purchased feed. The comfrey doesn't eliminate the feed bill. In a warm month average, it cuts it. On a full year basis, you're looking at a reduction of about 30 to 40% on annual feed spend, not 100%. Anyone telling you comfrey alone replaces commercial feed entirely is either running chickens in a mild climate year-round growing zone or is not being careful with their numbers. The management mistake I promised at the start, the one that turns a productive planting into an invasive problem. Most online sources on growing comfrey for chickens say plant comfrey without specifying Bocking 14, and a significant number of the root cuttings sold on Etsy, through Amazon third-party sellers, and at plant swaps are common comfrey Symphytum officinale, which produces viable seed in large quantities and spreads from root fragments the size of a thumbnail. Common comfrey in a well-watered backyard with good soil which is exactly what a property with a productive garden looks like, will colonize a new area from seed or root fragment within one season. By year 3, you have a plant that is extremely difficult to remove completely because the taproot system can reach 6 feet deep, roughly the depth of a standard residential well casing, and any fragment left in the soil regrows. The reason this matters practically is that most people who have a bad experience with comfrey and call it invasive were growing common comfrey. Most people who plant Bocking 14 keep it in a defined strip and handle root division carefully report exactly what Tom reports: a productive, contained, 20-year protein crop that stays where they put it. The practical verification before you buy: Bocking 14 plants almost never have fully formed seeds on the flower stalks. Common comfrey produces abundant seed. If you're buying root cuttings rather than growing plants, ask the seller specifically if they're selling Bocking 14 Russian comfrey or common comfrey. If they don't know the answer, that's your answer. Order from strictly medicinal seeds or a reputable herb farm that sells the variety by name. The root cuttings cost between $3 and $6 each, depending on the supplier and the time of year. 14 plants for Tom's strip cost him about $42 one time in 2011. That strip has been producing since 2012. The math doesn't require a spreadsheet. If you want the Bocking 14 sourcing guide, the regional planting calendar, and the feeding protocol by flock size and season, it also has the full 5-year cost comparison between comfrey supplemented and commercial-only feeding schedules for flock sizes from 6 birds to 24 birds. Link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Comfrey has been growing in Europe and Asia for centuries, feeding livestock through every economic disruption that made commercial feed temporarily unavailable or impossibly expensive. It didn't disappear because something better came along. It disappeared from the conversation because the conversation moved to platforms where $22 bags of feed are advertised before the video starts. 14 Bocking, 14 root cuttings in a 2-foot strip along your back fence, each one a perennial that will outlast the chickens you currently own. That's the whole ask. Plant them this spring, let them establish through the first summer, and start cutting in year 2. The math takes care of itself after that. Meanwhile, the bag of Kalmbach feeds on the shelf at Tractor Supply will cost more next spring than it does today. The root crowns in the ground won't.